Fortune published an article about the Gen Z and millennial crisis that is happening, economic crisis. And if you're not a Gen Z or a millennial, you may think that this isn't going to impact you, but it will, because it is impacting the economy as a whole. We are connecting this with a new out of reach report so that you can see where you stand in your state, and you can see what you should be making versus what you're currently making. And that's just to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. To no surprise to all of you, I'm sure you probably imagine the prices have increased since I covered the report from 2024. So, yes, you do need to earn more now than in 2024. And that goes along with this story that just came in. This is a big one. Gen Z and millennials can't afford to buy a house, and it shows the number of first time home buyers is half the historical norm. This is, I would say, sending 2008 alarm bells, and it doesn't seem to be going away. So listen to this. The American dream is on life support for first-time home buyers. New data shows, and the landscape will remain pretty bleak for a while. Young adults are staying with parents to save money or opting to house swap with a baby boomer relative to eke out a start in the housing market. So let me dive in here for just a second. I was one of those people that had to do that. Like I am a millennial. I'm an older millennial. To see the generation behind me, Gen Z, have to go through this as well, it is unfortunate. When I graduated from undergrad, I had to live with my parents for a year to save money while I was working, because the salaries that were being offered at that point in time were not enough for me to afford my own apartment, let alone a roommate. And that was in Columbia, South Carolina. So you have to remember, some of us have student loans to pay too. So it's not just, you're not just paying for rent, you're not just paying for a car payment, car insurance, but you're also having to pay back those student loans. So that's another one. Then to go on top of that, I think people also have to realize that there were many of us that, we weren't driving brand new cars. Like, I've never had a new car in my life. Every car that I've owned has been a used car. And I never expected that type of struggle after going to college. I didn't go to college to struggle. I went to college because I did want to be successful. I wanted to do well financially and hopefully establish generational wealth. That was the goal. And now we see the generation coming behind me is running into a similar problem that I ran into, but it looks like it's going to be worse for them. It's a dog eat dog world in today's housing market. Mortgage rates are still hovering near 7%, and Americans need to make 6 figures in order to afford a median price home, which is currently more than $422,000. So you need to make 6 figures. One of the things I'm going to give you a heads up about with the documentary that I'm doing, something that I found out while doing this documentary. A lot of people say, well, just try to live in an affordable housing complex. First of all, it's really hard to get into those apartment units, those affordable housing units. And I also just found out, which you will see this in the documentary, which is that in Boston in particular, you have to have a minimum income of $100,000 a year just to qualify. A lot of people don't know that. Affordable housing here, at least in Boston, isn't actually affordable. See, that's the shocker. That's what people need to understand. And a lot of us, when we graduated from undergrad, we're not making $100,000. So just keep that in mind, right? So that was a spoiler alert there. Those factors have gate-kept the housing market for many first-time home buyers who are typically younger generations like Gen Z and millennials. In fact, the housing market has become so unaffordable for these buyers. The number of first-time home buyers shrank to a historic low. A historic low. Look at it. Estimated number of first-time home buyers since 1995. I'll make this a little bit smaller so we can see the chart a little bit better. Here, look at this. That's where we are. This is where we are now. And we can see it has had its ups and downs. The highest, 2005. Then we all know that '08 housing crisis like really screwed over a lot of things. And I wanted to show you this graph because I do want to prove a point. As I predicted, we have still not fully recovered from the housing crisis in 2008. And this graph shows you just that. Look at it. 2008 right here. You can see some increase 2010 goes back down. Increase 2013 goes back down. And that's what it's been, just up and down, and now we're at the bottom. We're at the bottom here. It has not been this high since 2005. We had over 3.3 million first-time home buyers. Haven't seen that since 2005. It is now 2025. Now, why am I showing you this? Because yes, it is very difficult for millennials, but like I said, more so nowadays, Gen Z, very difficult. But all in all, you are going to see just how bad it is for kind of everybody, because that Low Income Housing Coalition released their 2025 report. And I want you to take a look at these numbers. We'll compare them to last year's as well. This is the map. The dark blue states are the states that you need to earn the most to be able to afford just a 2-bedroom apartment, right? So as the blues get lighter, you don't need to earn as much. We'll go ahead and just look at California, for example, because I knew this would be number one, just like it was last year. This is increased from last year. Now it is reported that you have to make $49.61 an hour to afford a 2-bedroom rental in California. If you are making minimum wage, you would need to work 120 hours a week. California is the top state with the highest housing wage. Now, I say this because of a reason. I'll be very clear about something. This whole fight for 15 doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything anymore. This is why I keep telling people we have to stop with the fight for 15. Fight for 15 is years old. And as you'll see, none of these states, $15 a get. No, that is long gone, honey bun. Long gone. And that's why I continue to say we need to be fighting for a living wage. Stop it with we need to increase the minimum wage to such and such. No, we need a living wage for people in this country. That's just California. Now, a lot of you are probably going to think it's just the blue states. So we're going to throw in a couple of maybe surprises here, like Florida. Florida also increased from last year. Florida is 9th. They're in the top 10. Highest housing wage. In Florida, you would need to make $37.27 an hour to afford a 2-bedroom rental. If you make minimum wage, you have to work 115 hours a week. You know why I'm pointing out Florida? Because over the years since I've covered this report, I've watched Florida continue to increase. You know why it's increasing? Because people are moving there. This is why I continue to say the way to solve this is not to tell people that you need to move to a cheaper state, right? Like, obviously, yes, that's going to be easier for you as an individual. And a lot of people do that. A lot of people in California, New York, etc., they'll move south to the states that are cheaper. But what I had tried to warn people is that over time, those cheaper states won't be so cheap anymore, because you have a supply and demand issue. When you have an influx of people that are coming in, the demand is going to increase, so they increase the prices. It's been happening all around. Been happening all around, folks. That was Florida. We're going to take a look at a couple other ones, okay? We got to do it, and I'm sorry for my peeps in New York, but you know we got to go here. New York is 3rd highest housing wage. In New York, you need to make $46.03 an hour to afford a 2-bedroom rental. You would have to work 119 hours a week if you were paid minimum wage. Now, New York is high because of New York City. You take New York City away, upstate New York isn't as expensive, right? That's New York. Let's go to my state, Massachusetts, 4th. That means that someone knocked us out, because we were in the top 3 last year, but it's still expensive as fuck here. 4th highest housing wage. You would need to earn $45.90 an hour to afford a two-bedroom. You'd have to work 122 hours a week if you made minimum wage. Let's go on. Here's another one. Virginia's 14th. Part of that has to do with DC. Sorry, gonna have to keep it real. $33.64 an hour to afford a two-bedroom rental. Let's go on. Let's throw in a doozy. Arizona. Arizona 13th. Arizona's a purple? Are we calling Arizona purple state now? Or is it still what is Arizona? Whatever you want to call it. 13th. They're in the top 20. Highest housing wage, 13th. You need to make $34.18 an hour to afford a two-bedroom rental in Arizona. If you make minimum wage, you have to work 93 hours a week. Sorry, that hovered over New Mexico. Texas. Texas is also increasing. Texas is ranked 22nd highest housing wage. You need to make $29.64 an hour to afford a two-bedroom in Texas. You need to work 164 hours a week if you make minimum wage. Let's go to Colorado. Colorado is 10th, $36.79 an hour to afford a two-bedroom rental, 99 hours a week if you make minimum wage. We're going to throw in some doozies. Maryland, we did Virginia already. Trying to get away from you, Virginia. That's Pennsylvania. Maryland. I know a lot of people that live in that area. Maryland is 8th highest housing wage, $39.15 an hour to afford a two-bedroom, 104 hours a week. Again, a lot of that has to do with DC. 104 hours a week if you make minimum wage. New Jersey is 7th, $39.99 an hour to afford a two-bedroom rental. If you make minimum wage, you'll have to work 103 hours a week. Connecticut's another one we need to look at because that one kind of, tries to skate by. And Connecticut is expensive too because of New York also. 11th, $35.42 an hour to afford a two-bedroom rental. You'll have to work 87 hours a week if you make minimum wage. Now, the West Coast, it's not just California. Washington State is ranked 6th. You can see it here, $41.11 an hour. Let's go to Oregon. Oregon is ranked 15th, $33.02 an hour to afford a two-bedroom rental. Let's continue on. Let's go down here because you know who we're forgetting? Hawaii. Hawaii is 2nd most expensive, highest housing wage. In Hawaii, you would need to make $49.19 an hour to afford a two-bedroom rental. If you are working your paid minimum wage, you'll have to work 141 hours a week. Now, let's pause here for a second. I think you're noticing a trend, right? The income requirement has continued to increase over the years since I've been covering this. You'll also notice some of these southern states, and we'll get to Georgia as well, some of these southern states are not out of the water either. I already showed you Florida. Let's look at Georgia. Georgia's 23rd highest housing wage. You'll need to make $29.46 an hour to afford a two-bedroom rental. If you are making minimum wage, you'll have to work 163 hours a week. I want to take a peek at North Carolina. This is another one you need to keep an eye on. North Carolina is ranked 30th, highest housing wage, $27.14 to afford a two-bedroom. And then there was another one that I wanted to point to. Let me see. It's Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's 28th. This is important to call out Pennsylvania, right? Highest housing wage, they rank 28th. You need to make $27.83 an hour to afford a two-bedroom. Do you know why I'm pointing out Pennsylvania? That's one of the states that still doesn't have $15 an hour. I believe Pennsylvania, last time I checked, was still $7.25 an hour for minimum wage. So this shouldn't happen in the land of dreams, right? Isn't this where people come from, land of dreams? At the end of the day, Puerto Rico is last. Puerto Rico has a housing wage of, they're ranked 52nd, excuse me. You need to make $11.64 an hour to afford a 2 bedroom in Puerto Rico. But then comes that question, how many jobs in Puerto Rico? What happens with a place like Hawaii, right? Where the weather is always nice and it's so beautiful, but how many jobs do they have there, right? Has always been expensive as long as I can remember. But you are noticing that some of these places that were really cheap are no longer as cheap as they used to be. This is the reality in the United States right now. For those who are just joining, this is the Out of Reach report. This report is released every year, and every year that I've covered it, the requirements continue to increase for all of these states. That's why the fight for 15 is ridiculous, in my opinion. Now, I want to show you something else. This is important as well, because you see, what people may not realize is that even though I gave you those numbers, that is for the state as a whole. But the numbers actually increase when you're looking at the metropolitan area. Because if you look here, California, and I thought this was really interesting. In California, when you look at the metropolitan areas, and I'm sorry if you guys can't see, I'll read it for you. The requirement increases. Santa Cruz area, these are the most expensive areas in California. Santa Cruz, you would need to make $81.21 an hour. You feel me? So the numbers that you see on that map, that is for the entire state. But once you look at the metropolitan areas, it increases even more. Who do you know that is making $81 an hour? That's just for Santa Cruz. That's not Los Angeles. That's Santa Cruz. San Jose, $66. San Francisco, $63. Santa Maria, $58. Salinas, $57. Everybody see what's happening here? Now I want to show you something else. That's this year. If we go back to last year, and I think this is important as well, you'll see that once again, even in those metropolitan areas, that also increased. Last year, Santa Cruz was $77. San Francisco was $64. San Jose was $60. Santa Maria was $57. Salinas was $55. The point is, I'm willing to bet you most of the people who live in these areas are not making that. And this is part of the reason why people in California can't buy a home, but it's not just California. So this whole fight for 15, that is so yesterday, man. That's yesterday. No more preaching about a fight for 15. Preach about a living wage. Because how can you, with $15 minimum wage, what are you supposed to do? Now, some people will come in and they will say, well, those minimum wage jobs were not meant for adults. They were meant for teenagers to work those jobs. Okay. So who is going to work those jobs when teenagers are in school? Who do you think is working at McDonald's, Burger King, Bed Bath and Beyond, if they still exist out there somewhere, Walmart, Target? Who do you think is working those jobs when kids are in school during the day? A lot of times, those are middle-aged women. The average middle-aged woman in this country is working retail or they're working at a restaurant. I know. I worked retail. All of my managers were in that category. So the whole idea that minimum wage jobs are only for teenagers doesn't make any damn sense. During the summer, I get it. But during the school year, somebody has to work those jobs throughout the day. The kids can't miss school. I don't know why people tried to pretend as though this wasn't happening all along. It was happening. So if you didn't know, now you know. When I worked at clothing stores, our managers weren't really making much. A lot of times, next time you go to a retail store, look around. Look and see who's working those jobs during the day. A lot of times it's middle-aged women, and they're not making much either. That's the average American. The average American isn't working a 9 to 5 job where they're making six figures. Take a look at another one. We talked about those metropolitan areas. So for my peeps in the DC area, I'm sorry to put you on blast, but you know I had to do it, right? We got to do it. When you look at DC, for example, Washington, that includes DC, Arlington, and Alexandria, Virginia, you need to make $44.50 an hour. The people that you see that are making your Starbucks latte or whatever it's called these days, the people that you see working at the drive-through that you go through, these people are not making that. A lot of them not even making $15 an hour. DC's a good one to look at, right? Another one that I want to take a look at. Let's go back to Florida. Let's go back to a red state. Again, you will see that once you get to the metropolitan areas, it increases. Now, I don't know what the hell is going on in Fort Lauderdale, but apparently in Fort Lauderdale, it's more expensive there than it is in Miami. In Fort Lauderdale, Florida, you need to make $45.92 to afford a two-bedroom. In Miami, $44.79. Monroe County, 43. West Palm Beach, 42. Tampa, Petersburg, Clearwater, 38. So think about that. That's Florida. So I think that people really got to take a look at this, man, because the reality is we are not heading where we should. Massachusetts, same thing. We're not going to go through all of them, but I just want to show you a couple examples that you'll see here. The most expensive areas. Now, Massachusetts, the state said you need to make like 40 something dollars an hour, right? But when you go to the most expensive, these expensive areas, Nantucket County, you need to make $54 an hour. Boston, Cambridge, and Quincy, $54 an hour. That's really the living wage. It's not $15. It's not 20. It's not 25. So when we think about the fact that we have millennials and Gen Z that can't afford to buy a home, I just want you to realize some of these people that you see working at the stores, at the retail stores, at the restaurants, a lot of them can't afford to buy one either. Some of them can barely afford rent. And this is why nowadays, especially in this area, this is why you see people in their late 30s and even in their 40s with roommates. This is not the way that the American dream is. That's not a dream. That's a nightmare. And it's continued to get worse over time. So I know sometimes, like a parents and grandparents may say, you guys need to take responsibility. Yeah, I get all that. But at some point, you have to look at the system and realize that we have a problem. And if this doesn't get resolved anytime soon, we're screwed. That does hurt the economy. If people aren't buying homes, that hurts the economy. If people aren't putting money into the economy, that hurts the economy. That's how it works. And if those people can't afford those 2-bedroom apartments or even a 1-bedroom apartment, and they have to have 3 and 4 roommates, then not only are they not going to be able to afford a home, but that also goes to show you they're probably not able to save any money either. Money matters. And I want people to think about that. And I hope people don't take this the wrong way. This is not to offend anybody who grew up privileged. I did not, or anybody who grew up wealthy. But I got to make this point here. Money does matter. And when you have money, when you're born with money, when you're born into a family that has money, things are going to be a little bit easier for you financially. And depending on how much money they have, things are going to be a lot easier for you financially. for the kids of the parents that are working those retail jobs, those restaurant jobs, the service industry jobs, things are going to be a lot harder for them, whether they go to college or not. If they go to college, they may get somewhat of a scholarship, and colleges are even sketchy on that nowadays, unless it's an athletic scholarship for the most part, to be honest with you. They're going to have student loans. The problem is, ladies and gentlemen, this disaster that is happening, it prevents people from establishing generational wealth. And if you can't establish generational wealth, your net worth is going to be very low or in the negative. You have nothing to pass on. And these kids shouldn't have to sit around and wait and hope that their parents give their house to them. And that's kind of what it's coming to for a lot of people. As if their parents have a house. And if you don't, then you have nothing to pass on. That is not the American dream. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.